Okay, good evening. Time to finally get back to Annihilation. I know we skipped a week there. Um, so we're going to get into chapters 2 and 3 tonight. So time to just settle back in here and get on into it. So, chapter 2. Theron's lip started to swell from the blow from the hook's knee. He felt like he'd been smashed with a swoop rider's helmet. He had a few small medkits tucked into his belt, but it didn't seem worth the effort. The wound was painful, but not debilitating. Instead, he ran through a simple series of mental exercises. Nagani Zhou had taught him to soothe the body and mind. It was a trick the Jedi used to help them draw on the Force to heal themselves, but Theron had found that there were benefits even for someone like him. He acknowledged the pain in his lip, embraced it, then let it slip away from his consciousness. Almost instantly the pain faded, though the damage remained. Good enough until the mission was over and he could get a med droid to fix him up properly. Winding his way through the back alleys without further incident, he emerged in the corner of a small square in the red light district. There were fewer people here than in the promenade, but it was crowded enough that Theron kept an eye peeled for pickpockets as he crossed the square. A trio of teens on swoop bikes buzzed the crowd, flying the colors of one of the local street gangs. They laughed at the angry shouts of the pedestrians, circling tauntingly just above their heads before zooming off to disappear around the corner. Theron paid them little heed as he approached his destination, a squat two-story building on the other side of the square owned by Morbo the Hutt, one of the Moon's many local crime lords. In the front of the building was a small casino bar called Morbo's Paradise. In the back was a warehouse for storing whatever illegal goods the Hutt was trafficking, along with Morbo's private office. The plan was simple. Go into the club, slip a hefty handful of credits to the manager, and ask for a meeting with Morbo. Once inside, Theron would use his powers of persuasion and the Hutt's greed and self-interest to convince Morbo to call off the hit on Tefith and her crew. Quick, clean, and simple wasn't Theron's usual style, but he wasn't in the mood for any surprises. The club was more crowded than usual, probably irrelevant, but Theron couldn't help but notice. After the ambush in the alley, his senses were on high alert. He quickly scanned the club for anyone who seemed out of place. If SIS had assigned the hook to keep an eye on Morbo, there could be other agents on the case. He didn't see anyone who specifically grabbed his attention, but he did notice something else unusual. Most of the patrons weren't gambling. They sipped drinks, sitting alone or in pairs at tables and at the bar as if waiting for something. A few openly studied him as he strode toward Rurs Shalit, the Nemoidian manager of the club, who was standing in a corner near the back. Behind him, a pair of Gamorrean bouncers stood on either side of a door leading to the rooms in the back of the club. Early in his preliminary investigations, Theron had learned that Rurs was Morbo's second in command. The Hutt called the shots. The Nemoidian was in charge of carrying out his orders. Theron had also learned that Rurs was dumb enough to take cuts for himself when Morbo wasn't looking, but smart enough to keep the grifts small and unnoticeable. Eager at this point to get the mission over with, Theron skipped all pretense. I need to speak to Morbo. Forget it. Go away with the others. Go wait with the others. The reply caught Theron off guard. He'd expected Rears to say something like, Nobody speaks to Morbo. Talk to me and I'll pass it along. Or maybe, What's in it for me? The unexpected response stoked Theron's already burning curiosity. He struggled to stay on script. Get me in to see your boss and I'll make it worth your while. The Neimoidian held him in a withering gaze. Morbo runs a clean auction. No sneak peeks at the merchandise. Go sit down before this gets ugly. The Gamorreans turned to him, their porcine snouts curled in anticipation, revealing their protruding tusks. Can't blame a guy for trying, Theron said with a shrug as the pieces clicked into place. The extra patrons at the club weren't gambling because they were here looking to buy. Theron hadn't heard anything about an auction in the 3 days he'd been on Nar Shaddaa. It must have been set up weeks ago. Potential buyers already contacted long before he arrived. And Theron could think of only one reason for all the secrecy. Morbo's auctioning off captured Republic POWs. Slavery was legal in the Sith Empire and on Hutt-controlled worlds. The Republic generally turned a blind eye to the Hutt slave trade, but there was one notable exception. Any Hutt who auctioned off captured Republic soldiers inevitably became a target of covert Republic retaliation. Privateers seizing cargo in transit, anonymous vandals targeting the Hutt's holdings and warehouses on various planets, customs officials on core worlds conducting numerous random inspections on arriving shipments from the Hutt's business partners. Selling POWs into slavery was bad business, and most Hutts avoided it, but Morbo was greedy, even for his notoriously avaricious species, and a secret auction of Republic prisoners was right up his alley. Aware that Rears was still watching him, Theron made his way over to an empty table near the entrance and sat down. The Gamorrean bouncers eyed his retreat, snouts sagging in disappointment at the lost chance to pummel a seemingly helpless customer. He settled into his seat and mulled over his options. Everyone probably assumed he represented a buyer wishing to remain anonymous, and he'd have to play along if he didn't want to raise suspicion. He could wait out the auction, toss out a few lowball bids to play his part, then try to meet with Morbo after to bargain for Tethys' life. That would be the most prudent course of action, but the idea of sitting idly by while his fellow soldiers were auctioned off like chattel galled Theron. What if I'm not the only one? What if I'm not the only one willing to just let this happen? Is this what Operation Transom is about? Then again, if SIS had learned about Morbo's secret auction, the director could have thrown together a special op to try to liberate their fellow soldiers. And I might have just messed the whole thing up by taking out Operation Transom's point man. Theron's first instinct was to do whatever it took to free the Republic prisoners. If he screwed up the mission, he should be the one to fix it. On the other hand, if Transom was still on, the last thing Theron wanted was to get in the way. There was no way... Okay, sorry. There was no way to know which was the right call, not without more information. Unfortunately, contacting SIS wasn't an option. Like all the casinos in the red light district, Morbo's club was equipped with top-of-the-line security equipment. Any incoming or outgoing transmissions in a 3-block radius would be intercepted and analyzed, a standard precaution to prevent cheaters from communicating with a partner outside the casino who could be using a computer to calculate the odds on the games. Theron surveyed the crowd, searching again for some sign that SIS had another agent in place posing as a buyer, but nobody stood out from the crowd, of course. If they did, the mission would be blown. Gotta make the call. Sit tight or get on your feet and get moving. For Theron, it wasn't hard to reach a decision. Rears and the other patrons had shifted their focus from him to other new arrivals, making it easy for him to get up and slip outside without attracting attention. In front of the club, he cast a quick glance to make sure nobody was watching, then casually, oh, we're in an ad. I wondered when it was going to start. That's why I kept hesitating. It's like, is it going to start? Is it going to start? Um, so bear with me a minute here. We have 36 seconds left. And we'll just jump right in at the beginning of that paragraph. So we're almost there. We're not very far into this, but so far I'm liking it. I'm liking the way the person writes. Um, it's pretty straight, you know. I don't know. It's my style. All right, so getting back to now that we're back from the ad, for Theron it wasn't hard to reach a decision. Rears and the other patrons had shifted their focus from him to other new arrivals, making it easy for him to get up and slip outside without attracting attention. In front of the club, he cast a quick glance to make sure nobody was watching, then casually wandered into the side alley and made for the warehouse built onto the back. He didn't need to see inside to picture the scene. Armed guards watching over unfortunate prisoners about to be auctioned off. There was a single Durasteel door at the back, a pair of blacked out windows 1 story up. He dismissed the door, taking the obvious entrance would give the guards time to react. It was unlikely the windows were alarmed or protected by a security field. The difficulty in getting to them was defense enough. He considered scaling the wall to get to the windows, but he'd be exposed if any of the guards wandered out into the back alley. Better to come at them from above, where he was less likely to get noticed. Theron wandered back out to the front of the club and merged with the flow of pedestrians wandering the square. He walked halfway down the block, past 3 buildings on the same side of the street, then paused at the entrance of a narrow back lane next to a 3 story building. Judging from the signage, it was a combination pawn shop and dance hall. That's a weird combination. He checked to see if anyone was watching. The 3 hoodlums on swoop bikes he'd seen earlier streaked overhead again, coming in so low that pedestrians had to duck to avoid being clipped. They whooped and yelled before climbing safely out of reach and accelerating into the distance. Theron took advantage of the distraction and ducked into the alley, sauntering to the back of the building. He pulled his climbing gloves from where they had been tucked in at the rear of his belt, tugged them over his hands, flexed his fingers. He tested the grip on the side of the building. A million needle-like nanofibers woven into the fabric of the gloves caught on the invisible imperfections of the seemingly smooth surface, giving him purchase. Moving with the simian dexterity of a Akashic Tatch, he scampered up the side of the pawn shop's exterior wall and onto the roof. He didn't pause to catch his breath, taking 3 quick steps and leaping across the narrow alley separating the pawn shop from the 2 story building beside it. He landed softly, tucking into a roll to absorb the impact. The alley before the next building over was slightly wider, and he once again ran across the roof and jumped across without any hesitation. On the rooftop of the building adjacent to Morbo's club, he paused and contemplated the nearly 10-meter gap between them. You've made longer jumps before, and if you fall, you've survived worse. Gathering himself, he sprinted toward the edge. Half a step before he jumped, the 3 joyriding teens whizzed down the alley in front of him on their swoops. Unaware, Theron was leaping across the rooftops just above them. Distracted, Theron stumbled, his boot slipping on the uneven surface of the roof as he planted his foot for his final leap. His body's muscle memory reacted instinctively to the sudden loss of balance and momentum by throwing itself forward to offset its shifting center of gravity. Theron was still able to push off the ledge. Halfway across the gap, he realized he wasn't going to make it. He threw his left arm out in a desperate attempt to snag the ledge. The fingertips of his climbing glove grazed against the surface, the nanofibers latching onto the permacrete half a meter below the roof. His plunge came to an abrupt and jarring halt, nearly wrenching his left shoulder from its socket, and his body twisted so hard he slammed into the building. He grunted in pain as the wind got knocked from his lungs. Supported by his single aching limb, he dangled in the breeze and struggled to catch his breath. After several seconds, Theron had recovered enough to reach up and slap his right palm against the building, allowing the other arm to bear some of his weight. Ignoring the protest of his left shoulder socket, he hauled himself up and over the ledge and lay on his stomach atop the roof of Morbo's club. Rising to his feet, he tested his shoulder with a quick range of motions. The pain made him grit his teeth, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. At the same time, Theron listened for any sound indicating that his inelegant arrival had attracted the attention of someone inside the club. Hearing nothing but the noise of the swoop-riding teens fading away into the distance, he dropped into a crouch and scuttled along the rooftop to the edge of the rear wall. From his belt, he pulled out a length of thin, flexible, I double-clicked, wire tipped with a small precision laser cutter and a miniature cam. Theron flicked the cam on, and the image that fed into its lens was transmitted to a heads-up display embedded in the cybernetic implant in his left eye. Using the cam's relayed image to guide his hand, he carefully lowered the wire over the edge until it was even with the top left corner of one of the blacked-out windows. With a series of whispered commands, Theron cycled the cam through the visible infrared and ultraviolet spectrums, searching the various wavelengths for the faint, shimmering glow that would indicate the presence of some type of security field protecting the windows. He wasn't surprised to find the windows were clean. Even Morbo couldn't afford to invest in expensive electronic security fields on every possible point of access. Theron twisted the base of the wire, and the laser activated, melting a tiny hole in the corner of the glass and allowing him to work the cam through for a look inside the warehouse. Scattered crates and shipping containers in the back corner, 4 Cathar were huddled together on the floor, 3 males and 1 female. The prisoners had their hands clasped behind their backs, their heads held high, even though their feline features were set in grim resignation. A pair of armed guards, both human, stood watch over them, their slouched stances and disinterested expressions revealing their boredom as they waited for Morbo to start the auction. Moving the laser in slow circles, Theron melted the circumference of the hole in the window until it was large enough for him to reach his hand through, but hopefully still small enough to escape attention. He retracted the wire, stored it safely in his belt, then carefully lowered himself over the edge until his feet rested on the windowsill. Using the climbing glove of his left hand to help maintain his balance, he peered through the hole, pinpointing the location of each guard with the automated targeting implant in his left eye. He shifted so he could slip his right hand through the hole in the glass. Though firing blind, his cybernetic augmentations... What? He shifted so he could slip his right... Oh, I see. It didn't make any sense. I thought maybe there was a glitch in the... Anyway, moving on. He shifted so he could slip his right hand through the hole in the glass. Though firing blind, his cybernetic augmentations kept him locked onto his targets as he whispered Toxicity 6 and launched the last 2 darts from his bracer. When he peeked back through the hole in the window, he saw that both guards were down and out. The captives on the ground looked around with a confused mixture of fear and hope. Knowing it was unlikely anyone in the casino at the front of the club would hear, Theron turned his head to the side and punched away the rest of the glass with the ball of his fist. Moving quickly, he squeezed through the window frame and dropped to the ground below, tucking and rolling to absorb the impact. He sprang to his feet and raised a finger to his lips. The female Cathar, the senior ranking member of the group, based on her sergeant's stripes, nodded curtly in understanding. Theron rifled through the pockets of the unconscious guards, finding a small key on the second. Moments later, the Cathar were free of their restraints and on their feet. Theron moved to the exit on the far side of the warehouse floor. He made sure the door to the alley wasn't locked and that opening it wouldn't trigger any alarms, as the Cathar rubbed their wrists to restore circulation. "Who are you?" the female Cathar asked. "Republic SIS," Theron said. "We look after our own." "That door leads to the back alley," he added, pointing to the exit. "Can you make it from here?" The Cathar nodded as she bent down and retrieved the blaster rifle from the guard at her feet. One of her companions snatched another blaster from the second guard. "Thank you," she said, before she and the others sped off toward freedom. Once the Cathar were safely away, he searched the rest of the warehouse until he located the door that led to the private offices between the warehouse in the back and the building and the casino club out front. Theron opened the door carefully, peering through the doorway to discover that the corridor was empty. He guessed Morbo's thugs were probably out front, keeping an eye on the prospective buyers waiting for the auction. The corridor led off in two directions. Standing still, Theron heard the unmistakable murmur of a crowded bar coming from off to his right, so he turned and headed the opposite way. He didn't have to go far before he found what he was looking for. A thick beaded curtain hung across an archway at the end of the hall. Theron stepped through and came face to face with the club's owner. Morbo's private office was a testament to the gluttony, vanity, and avarice of his species. The crime lord's bulk was draped over a luxurious, custom-made couch, and the rest of the room was cluttered with opulent gold statues, gaudy paintings, and other garish objets d'art fashioned in the crime lord's own image. Several female Twi'lek servants scurried about the room with downcast eyes as they whisked away the remains of what appeared to be a lavish and exotic feast for a dozen people, but which Theron realized was merely the hut's pre-auction meal. Morbo stared at him with unmistakable disdain. He clearly didn't see Theron as a threat, though his servants had all retreated and were cowering in the far corners of the room. "I told Rears no visitors before the auction," he growled in Huttese, his voice so deep Theron could feel it trembling through the floor and up into his feet. "Next auction, I should put that useless Nemoidian up for sale." Like all SIS agents, Theron was fluent in Huttese, but the language put a strain on human vocal cords, so he stuck with basic for his reply. "I'm not here for the auction." "No? Then come back later." Morbo's long, thick tongue darted out to lick away a spot of grease rolling down the jowls of his chin. "I have to show my merchandise in 10 minutes." Theron didn't think it was prudent to mention that because of him the auction had been postponed indefinitely. "I'll be quick," grated mighty Morbo. "What I have to say could be very profitable for you." The combination of stroking the hut's ego and dropping the magic P-word grabbed Morbo's full attention. "Speak. It better be worth my time." "I know about the hit on the members of the old Tion Brotherhood." Tion? I'm not sure. Tion. I'm not sure how he intends it to be pronounced. Theron said, jumping straight to the point. Morbo laughed, slapping his meaty hands against the rolls of fat covering his chest. "You're too late. I hired someone else for that job." "I'm not bidding for the contract. I want you to call it off." "Impossible. The Brotherhood smuggled spice through my territory without paying my commission. You should know better." "I'm not with the Brotherhood," Theron assured him. "I represent other interests." "Then why do you care?" "This isn't a smart business move," Theron continued, evading the question as his mind raced to come up with the convincing argument that wouldn't reveal who he was or whom he worked for. "Going to war with the Brotherhood could be expensive, but call off the hit and I'll find the credits to cover your commission." "This isn't about credits," Morbo said, his slug-like body quaking with rage. "Since Zidania took over, the old Tian Brotherhood has been expanding, looking for new territory. I need to send her a message. Nobody messes with Morbo. Zidania didn't authorize this mission, Theron explained. The smugglers are working freelance. Then she won't care if I eliminate them. One of them works for me, Theron lied. If you hurt her, I'll care. Her, Morbo said with a cunning smile. You mean the Twi'lek. Theron didn't see much point in trying to deny it. He nodded. You say she works for you? Morbo continued, his tail twitching slightly. But who are you, exactly? Someone who wants to see Zidania fail. Theron lied. I've worked hard to get my contact close to her. If you don't call off this hit, I'll have to start over. Morbo chuckled, the rolls of fat quivering with delight. Clearly he relished the idea of a mole inside someone else's criminal organization. His eyes narrowed as he tried to assemble the random bits of truth and fiction from Theron's story together into a single theory. You represent a rival looking to take Zidania's place. Another gang looking to bring the Brotherhood down? Law enforcement from the Tian hegemony? I really can't say. It doesn't matter anyway, Morbo said, with a regretful sigh. Your friends are ready to leave. They're loading the spice onto their ship. My people are already headed to the spaceport. You're too late. Theron swore in old high Gamorese as he spun on his heel and darted back into the hall. As he ran toward the door leading back to the warehouse, he heard angry shouts of surprise coming from the other side. Someone had found the downed guards. He continued past the warehouse door, his legs chewing up the ground in long, quick strides as he continued down the hall and burst through the door leading into the club. The Gamorrean bouncers on either side were too surprised to try to stop him. Their job was to keep people from going into the back, not stop someone coming out. Theron didn't look back as he raced out the door and into the street, heading for the spaceport. And that is the end of that chapter, chapter 2. So we'll get into chapter 3 here. Now, I already looked ahead. It's a little bit shorter than that one. As he bobbed and weaved his way through the crowd, Theron realized he'd never get to the spaceport in time on foot. Fortunately, the unmistakable whine of incoming swoop engines gave him an idea. Dashing into the middle of the square where he'd be most visible, he shook his fist and shouted up at the young gang members who had circled back around to buzz the crowd yet again. Take your flying toys and get on home, you little punks. As he'd expected, the three riders banked their swoops and came straight at him, drawn by his challenge. Theron ducked and covered his head as the first swoop buzzed past, a couple of meters overhead. The second came even closer. Theron turned and ran toward the cover of the nearest building, throwing quick glances over his shoulder as he pretended to flee in terror. The third rider took the bait and gave chase, accelerating to cut Theron off before he could get to safety. He came in much lower than the other two, trying to force Theron to prostrate himself on the ground to avoid getting struck by the swoop. Theron played his part by crouching low as if cowering in fear. Then at the last moment he sprang up and grabbed the rider's arm as the swoop narrowly missed him. Caught by surprise, the young thug was yanked from his seat. Theron held his grip for just an instant, twisting so that the rider fell hard on his backside and not on his unprotected head. The rider rolled over across the square as the swoop veered and spun crazily out of control until the internal stabilizers righted it. The swoop's built-in safety protocols detected the rider's absence and brought the vehicle down for a safe landing on the other side of the square. The crowd processed what had just happened in a stunned silence, broken by the sound of the other two swoops racing away, their riders unaware of their friend's fate. Then everyone erupted in a spontaneous round of applause and cheers. Theron ignored them and ran over to check on the fallen rider. The young man had rolled over onto his back, where he lay dazed and groaning. Several patches of skin on his bare arms and hands had been scraped raw from his fall, but otherwise he appeared okay. Hey, kid, next time wear a helmet, Theron said, giving him a pat on the cheek. The teen only groaned in reply, though he did manage to flash an obscene gesture. Theron took that as a sign he was all right. The sound of the retreating swoop engines changed pitch, and the other two thugs were circling back. Theron turned and ran for the fallen rider's swoop, leapt on, and fired up the engine. As he took off, he hoped the other two would stop to look after their friend instead of giving chase. Glancing back over his shoulder, however, he wasn't surprised to see them close on his tail. Theron punched with the accelerator, pushing his ride to full speed as he climbed in altitude, the buildings and streets a blur of colors as he flew past. In the days before joining the SIS, Theron had carved out a reputation on the minor league swoop circuits of Manan. He doubted the riders in pursuit were a match for his skills, but he was on an unfamiliar machine, racing through streets they knew like the back of their hands. Losing them wasn't going to be easy. He didn't worry about them taking him down with blasters. Swoop bikes were notoriously unstable, and at high speeds, even the most experienced riders needed both hands to maintain control. But if they were reckless enough, they could try ramming him with their own swoops to force him into a crash. Navigation overlay for current location, he whispered, and the HUD in his left eye implant responded by superimposing a map of the surrounding area over his vision. The blue dot signifying his location was moving too quickly across the map for Theron to look for shortcuts, so he plotted a course through the main thoroughfares. He doubted his pursuers would do the same. The swoop he took was improperly balanced, and it would take a while for him to get a true feel for the bike. He banked hard around a corner, struggling to hold the line as the swoop tried listing to the left. Throwing his weight in the opposite direction, he managed to stay upright, but the awkward move cost him speed. Glancing back over his shoulder, Theron saw only one gang member in pursuit. Alarms went off in his head, and he focused on the map overlaying his vision. He saw the side alley on the map a split second before it appeared to his left, giving him just enough time to throttle back. The early deceleration allowed Theron to narrowly avoid a collision as the second rider shot out of the alley just in front of him in an attempt to knock him off his swoop. Theron dived down and to the left, the sharp change of direction overstressing the stabilizers on the misbalanced vehicle. Instead of fighting to stay upright, though, he leaned into it and hammered the accelerator, pushing the swoop into a tight barrel roll that took him under the rider who'd cut in front of him. The kid following wasn't able to mimic Theron's move. The only way he could avoid ramming into his partner was by slamming the emergency brakes, stalling the engine as the other two swoops raced ahead and left him behind. The spaceport was only a few kilometers away, well outside the territory of the rider's gang. With his friends no longer in the picture, Theron figured his pursuer just needed a little more encouragement to give up the chase. He released the grip of his right hand as he grabbed the blaster on his hip. The swoop bucked and swayed as soon as he let go, but now that he was used to the idiosyncrasies of the machine, Theron managed to maintain control long enough to turn and fire a pair of quick shots at his pursuer. The bolts went nowhere near their target. Flying a swoop bike with one hand was a feat in itself. Holding it steady enough to accurately aim was nearly impossible. Regardless, the bolts had the desired effect. The other rider decided he'd had enough and veered off, ending the pursuit. Theron slowed his vehicle and slapped his blaster back into its holster, struggling to keep the swoop on line the entire time. Once he had two hands on the handles again, he took it back up to full speed for the rest of the journey. He arrived at the spaceport less than a minute later, bringing the swoop in for a landing near the main doors leading into the hangar bays where Tethys and her crew had docked their ship. A small crowd was milling around outside the entrance. Curious, Theron tapped an agitated-looking Celestin on the shoulder. "What's going on here, friend?" "Ugly business," the Celestin replied in his native tongue. "Hut business." "Which hut? Morbo?" Theron asked in basic. He had a bad feeling he already knew the answer. The Celestin shrugged. "Don't know. Armed men show up, tell everyone in bays 7 through 12 to clear out. I don't ask questions." The distinctive sound of a heavy repeating blaster rang out from inside the hangar. The crowd collectively flinched and took a few steps back, leaving a clear path for Theron as he ran inside. Tethys was in the middle of loading crates of tightly packed spice onto the ship when she was suddenly hit with an overpowering sense that something wasn't right. Nothing specific, just a half-imagined tingling in the tips of her leku. Based on past experience, she knew better than to ignore it. "Something bad coming," she said in her heavily accented basic, drawing twin blasters that she kept at her sides and scanning the spaceport for anything suspicious. Gorvich, the human who'd set up the spice deal on Narshada, snorted as he finished his pre-flight inspection of the ship's exterior. "You've been complaining ever since we landed, Sunshine." Tethys' lip curled up in a sneer. Gorvich had originally given her the nickname because of her yellow skin and sunny disposition. She was convinced he kept using it just to annoy her. She had a nickname for him, too. Idiot. Hardly original, but accurate. In her 20-odd standard years, she had worked as security and muscle for low-level scum across the galaxy, trying to scrape out a living on the fringes of so-called decent society. She'd dealt with thieves, killers, slavers, and sociopaths, but nobody brought bile to her throat like Gorvich. Not even that SIS agent who'd gotten her mixed up in a crazy suicide mission almost 2 years ago. It was tempting to just put Gorvich out of his misery with one clean shot between the eyes, but that would mean walking away from the old Tion Brotherhood. And Tethys wasn't ready to do that. The Brotherhood was growing fast, and Tethys was already earning a reputation. If she'd played her cards right, the next few years could see her moving up the ranks until she was the one calling the shots instead of taking orders from morons. Fryn, another member of the crew, grunted as he sauntered down the ship's boarding ramp to join them on the loading platform. "Sounds like you're just trying to get out of loading these crates," he said. Tethys ignored him. He was almost as stupid as Gorvich, but he wasn't in charge. She didn't need to convince him of anything. "Forget the cargo. Gotta go. We leave now." "Are you crazy, Sunshine? Do you know how much this spice is worth?" said Gorvich. "Can't spend if you dead." "Did you know she was this paranoid when you decided to bring her along?" Fryn asked Gorvich, smirking. "Think Morbo double-crossed us?" Tethys asked. "Sent goons to get our cargo." Gorvich laughed. "Not likely. Morbo doesn't even know we're here." Tethys' eyes went wide. "What you mean?" "I'm not cutting that bloated slug in on our deal just because he thinks he owns this district. Figured we'd handle the deal ourselves and make an extra 20%. "Idiot!" Tethys spat, barely suppressing the urge to unleash a volley of bolts into his chest at point-blank range. "Morbo knows. Going to get us killed." Gorvich rolled his eyes, but Veb, the fourth member of their crew, set down the crate he was carrying and joined the conversation. "Maybe she's right," the Rhodian said. "I feel it too. Something's off." As soon as he spoke, Tethys realized what was wrong. The spaceport was always bustling with activity. Crews loading or unloading their ships, mechanics making repairs, but instead of the familiar sounds, right now she heard only silence. All the loading docks around their vessel were deserted. "Down!" she shouted, diving forward, tackling Gorvich and dragging the boat to the ground behind a stack of crates still waiting to be loaded onto the ship. Veb followed her lead, his thin, wiry body ducking behind the crate he had just set on the ground. Fryn, however, just stood where he was, staring at them with a look of skeptical bemusement. A second later, a heavy repeating blaster echoed through the deserted spaceport, and Fryn's body slumped to the ground, his dead eyes open and his face frozen in the same stupid expression. Tethys poked her head up, then ducked back down almost instantly behind her makeshift bunker as another volley rang out. From the sound, she was able to pick out general points of origin for the shots. "2 shooters," she said to Gorvich, tilting her head in each direction. "There and there." Gorvich popped his head up briefly, then ducked back down as the assassins opened fire. "I can't see 'em." Tethys didn't bother to tell him what a waste of effort his actions were. The far side of the hangar was shrouded in thick shadows and cluttered with heavy machinery for loading and unloading cargo from the incoming ships. The assassins were well protected and well hidden. Maybe you can make a break for the ship, Gorvich suggested as he checked the charge on each of his blasters. She almost let him try, but then realized she'd need his help if she were going to get out of this alive. Shooter's got the angle on ship. Cut us down if we go for it. So what's the plan? Tefeth ran through the possible scenarios in her mind. The shooters had chosen their positions to pen them in and keep them from getting to the safety of the ship, but there was a door in the rear of the hangar she might be able to reach. If she got through the door, she could work her way through the adjacent docking bays of the spaceport and try to flank their attackers. Slip out the back into Bay 7. Circle around to Bay 9. Come up behind. Sounds risky, Gorvich said, eyeing the open stretch between their current position and the door at the rear of their hangar. Want me to send Veb? Tefeth glanced over at the Rhodian, still cowering behind the crate. He was a good pilot, but not much use in a fight. He hadn't even drawn his pistol. You joking? What if there are more than just two shooters? Gorvich asked. Tefeth was surprised her idiot leader was capable of anticipating a trap, though she had already considered the possibility. If she had been the one planning this ambush, she'd have tried to flush the targets away from the ship and through the door at the rear leading into the adjacent hangar and right into the waiting crosshairs of a third shooter. Bay 7 wasn't in use. The lights were off, and try as she might, she couldn't tell if there was someone waiting in the gloom to spring a trap. But she didn't see any other options. Better to just go for it and hope there were only two assassins. Cover us, she said, getting her long legs ready for the quick sprint to the door. Gorvich nodded, then popped up from behind the crates, screaming his fury as he unleashed a wild volley of shots to draw their enemy's fire. Tefeth took off, crouching low, but moving fast as she broke for the door and the darkness beyond. Okay. Theron ran through the deserted hangars, heading toward Bay 8, where Tefeth's crew had docked their ship. He heard another round of blaster fire and took it as a good sign. There wouldn't have been more shots unless Tefeth and her people were fighting back. Charging into the middle of the firefight in Bay 8 was too risky even for Theron, so he took a detour through the adjacent hangar. He plunged into the darkness of the unused Bay 7, nearly knocking over a heavily armored figure half hidden in the shadows. A single thick horn protruded from the center of his bald head, clearly marking him as an Adovasi, even in the near darkness. He was standing in the middle of the room with his blaster rifle raised to his shoulder, back toward the entrance Theron had come through. Attention focused on the door leading into Tefeth's Bay. Hearing the pounding steps coming up behind him, the Advazi started to turn toward the new arrival, but Theron was on him before he could react. With a front kick, he knocked the blaster rifle from the alien's hands, then threw a quick flurry of punches at his face. However, the assassin wasn't some clumsy street thug. He ducked under the blows and took Theron off his feet with a leg sweep. Theron rolled out of the way as his foe brought an elbow crashing down on the floor where his head had been an instant before. Still prone, he lashed out with his boot, but the Advasi turned away, and instead of crashing into his jaw, it glanced off his shoulder. The assassin reached to his belt for his backup weapon. Theron was faster, snapping his arm up as he growled, "Toxicity 10," unleashing the only unused weapon still left in his bracer. Unlike the arsenal of incapacitating darts, the single-shot pinpoint laser was lethal at a range of less than 3 meters. The bright intensity of the needle-thin beam pierced the darkness and struck the Adavazi just below the horn protruding from the center of his brow, killing him instantly. The body toppled forward, momentarily pinning Theron beneath its bulk. Before he had a chance to roll the fallen assassin off him, someone else came barreling into the room from the door on the opposite end. Tefeth heard the assassins returning Gorvich's fire as she raced, exposed across the hangar floor. A pair of bolts ricocheted off the ground beside her as she dived through the open door and into the unlit room beyond. Safely out of the line of fire, uh, safely out of the line of fire, period. She slid across the floor and scrambled to her feet, bracing herself for the deadly impact of a blaster bolt from the possible third assassin waiting in the shadows. But the trap was never sprung, and Tethys grinned as she realized they might still get out of this alive. Assassins didn't want to cut the bounty 3 ways. Greedy, stupid. Eager to make them pay for their mistake, she rushed through the room and out the door on the other side. She never even noticed the 2 figures, one alive, one dead, lying in the shadows on the floor only a few meters off to the side. Theron watched Tethys race past, oblivious to his presence. Once she was gone, he rolled out from under the Advazi's corpse and got to his feet. He preferred to disable opponents when possible, but sometimes that wasn't an option. In any case, he wasn't about to shed tears for a hired assassin. He'd saved Tethys from walking into a deadly trap, and he'd done it without giving himself away. But there were other assassins to deal with, and though Tethys might have gained the upper hand thanks to his intervention, he wasn't about to leave her fate to chance. Moving more cautiously and keeping to the shadows, he slipped away in the direction the young Twi'lek had disappeared. And that is the end of Chapter 3. So we leave it on a little bit of a cliffhanger in the midst of a firefight, but that's okay. We'll just pick it up next time, next Monday. So I'm enjoying this book. So far, like I said earlier, I like this guy's writing, or person. I don't know, is it a guy, a man, or a woman that wrote that? I like their writing style. So anyway, let's see who is around to raid. Why don't we? See, we've got Mr. Blitzer on. And let's see. Well, Alyosha's on, Words on Stream, whatever that is. Red and Flames has got his always on thing going again, so I don't know what's up with that. Yeah, let's go ahead and go over to Mr. Blitzer. He's playing Assassin's Creed Origins, so I've been interested in maybe checking out the Assassin's Creed games. I've never played any of them, so bear with me a minute. I'll get us on over there, and I will see you there. Mr. Blitzer, where are you?
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I had, but more sophisticated into love relations. I'm disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places. I'm giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me